Final hour on a Thursday here on the Gary Sutton Show, and always your turn to make the call at 1-800-357-0910. I think probably my favorite guest over the years has always been this next gentleman, Dr. Walter E. Williams, serves on the faculty of George Mason University as a John M. Olin Distinguished Professor of Economics, is the author of Race and Economics, How Much Can Be Blamed on Discrimination, and Up from the Projects, an autobiography, a columnist, an author, sometimes sit-in host for Rush Limbaugh, and a great guest, and we're glad to have him with us this morning. Dr. Williams, welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show.
Good morning, Gary.
When I read all the accolades right now and all the titles, that's almost the whole segment anymore. You're kind of building those up a lot. Anyway, I wanted to get into an article that came out yesterday in townhall.com. You were talking about the coming end to racial preferences. And as always, I think you do a great job of putting into the language that we can understand. And you were talking about last week's ruling in the Hewitt versus Coalition to Defend Affirmative Action et al. Upheld in Michigan's constitutional argument that bans racial preferences and admission to its public universities. Get into that a little bit for us, will you?
Well, yes, Michigan. I guess a couple of years ago, the citizens of Michigan, they voted to end all discriminatory policy in terms of admitting students to the state universities, and a suit was brought by the Coalition to Defend Affirmative Action, and anyway, the Supreme Court said that the people of Michigan had the right, constitutional right, to say, well, look, we're not going to have any race-based admissions, and the court ruled 6-2 in favor, 6-2 in favor of Michigan, and I think that one of the key things about these special admissions policies on college campuses is that they conceal the damage being done to kids by the public high schools. That is, kids are graduating from high school, particularly black kids and maybe Mexican kids. They're graduating from public high schools. They're given a high school diploma, and very often that high school diploma doesn't mean anything. That is, the average black kid graduating from high school has the reading, writing, and arithmetic skills of a white 7th or 8th grader. And so it's fraud that they give such a kid a high school diploma. And so when you allow colleges to have special admissions practices for black kids, what you do is that you conceal the rotten job that the public schools are doing.
And then you also have to have special classes for them in order for them to get through this special time in their college to walk out and find out that maybe the places they want to go be employed don't have special rules just for them.
That's absolutely right, and then also there's a huge dropout rate in colleges for black students. Well, for students in general, I think you're talking about somewhere near 62% for students in general not making it all through through college, and for blacks is only 32% or 34% or something like that, and so the kids are not making through college. And I think something else about the public schools in general, forget about race, is that they're doing a poor job, whether it's white or blacks, because it's slightly over 50% of all incoming freshmen at colleges across the United States, they require remedial English, remedial math, and remedial writing. So why should a person be admitted to college when he cannot do college-grade work?
Justice Sotomayor, who was writing for dissent, and you mentioned in your article kind of a bitter dissent, called the people who voted for that, the other 6 justices there, aside from she and Justice, I can't think of her name right off the top of my head, but Ginsburg. She went on to make the incredible argument, you say in your article, that the amendment which explicitly forbids racial discrimination itself amounts to racial discrimination. You know, when you have affirmative action now, it does amount to a racial discrimination, although it's going to help people from that particular side of the coin to get into the college, but again, not with the credentials that you'd want to have to get in with.
No, that is absolutely right. She's saying that. I mean, she's making the incredible argument that to end racial discrimination is in fact racial discrimination in and of itself.
Right.
And that's just preposterous. I mean, years ago, she would have been laughed off the bench. But a lot of people, they believe in they want diversity. They want and they make the very foolish argument, and there's no empirical support whatsoever that students benefit from diversity, from mixed races. Now, I'm not making an argument that there should not be mixed races, but you just cannot say that there's no empirical evidence to say, well, white students benefit from the presence of black students on campus.
But if you make diversity something that you manufacture as opposed to something that is authentic, then does diversity by itself hold water?
No, it doesn't. And then also, there's the problem of mismatch. That is, many black students, and it's most noticeable in the University of California system. Many black students are recruited to the state's top colleges, namely Berkeley and UCLA.
Right.
And they don't graduate. But since they had Proposition 209 ending affirmative action or preferential admissions in California, more black students graduate from college, from the University of California system, but they're just not represented at the flagship schools, at Berkeley and at UCLA. And so what it means is that many black students, in the name of diversity, they're being recruited to become failures. That is, they're being recruited to a top-named school, a top-ranked school like Berkeley, and becoming failures when they can go to University of California at Riverside and be a success.
We look at the battle between the heart and the mind here. The heart says, we got to get this thing evened up and so forth. The mind that you're exercising right here goes down and says, let's look at some of the reasons why this is happening. For example, one of the things that you point out in your article is that blacks, SATs were held around the country last weekend. Blacks score at least 100 points lower than whites in each of the assessment areas, critical reading, math, and writing. Asians score higher than whites in math and writing. SAT scores are also reported for Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans, Indians, and others. Blacks score lower than those minorities who themselves score lower than whites and Asians. So if you reject the racist notion of mental inferiority for blacks, and I do, then what happened? Why are we seeing that now? And you point out a great example here of Paul Laurence Dunbar High School down in Baltimore, which was
one of the Washington.
Washington. There's a Dunbar in Baltimore too, I'm thinking. But but the Paul Dunbar High School in Washington, and that was started back in 1870, and there wasn't any affirmative action going on then on that school, right?
That is absolutely right. And my colleague Tom Sowell, he's written about it, written a lot about it, and he says as far back as 1899, when academic tests were given to the 4 academic schools in Washington D.C., Dunbar students, these black students at Dunbar, scored higher than students at 2 of the 3 white high schools. And over the first several decades of the 20th century, I think something like 80%,
that's correct,
of 4/5 of Dunbar graduates went on to college, and quite a few of them went to the Ivy League colleges, and they graduated Phi Beta Kappa.
Right.
And so nobody can say, the reasons why these black students did so well back in the beginning of the 1900s was because of affirmative action, or what Sonia Sotomayor calls race-sensitive policies.
At one time, in fact, in your article, you say Dunbar graduates were admitted to Dartmouth and Harvard without having to take even an entrance exam.
That's right. Dunbar, Paul Laurence Dunbar High School in Washington had such a reputation that some colleges said, well, look, the fact that you graduated is just good enough because it had such a reputation. And by the way, these black kids who went to Dunbar, they weren't the cream of the crop. That is, in terms of, they weren't the elite. That is, that many of their parents worked for the post office. They were domestic servants, and they had other kinds of menial jobs. But they cared about the education of their kids, and the teachers there, they cared about the education of kids, and they didn't have any frills. Matter of fact, they didn't even have Paul Laurence Dunbar High School didn't even have a lunchroom. The kids either ate at their desks or ate at if it was warm enough outside, ate in the schoolyard. The blackboards look like road maps. There's so many cracks in the blackboard.
Right. The
books that they got were hand-me-down books from the white schools, because at this time there was gross racial discrimination in Washington and other places in our country. So, and moreover, the school budget. Their financial budget was far less than the white schools. So what does all this say to you? It says that, well, gee, academic excellence can be achieved by blacks without affirmative action, without all these things that people say that are necessary today for academic excellence. It just proves that it just turns them into liars.
You talk in the end of the article about people who are white liberals, black politicians, civil rights leaders, perhaps unwittingly, have taken steps to ensure that black children remain trapped. And your friend Dr. Soul said of all the cynical frauds of the Obama administration, few are so despicable as sacrificing the education of poor minority children to the interests of the teachers union. Talk a little bit about that.
What happens is that, take this guy up in New York, the new mayor in New York. Well, he's attacking the charter schools where the black kids are doing very, very well, and the reason why he's attacking them and seeking to defund them is because the education establishment is not wild about charter schools, because they don't have the kind of control over charter schools that they have over the public schools, and it's introducing competition in the game. Well, President Obama, when he came to Washington during the first part of his administration, he tried to eliminate the scholarship program for black kids who are doing much better under the scholarship program. And the reason why they're attacking him, Obama, he doesn't dislike black kids, but he wants the vote of the teachers union. He wants the campaign contributions from the teachers union, and so he's sacrificing black kids in order to curry favor with the teachers union.
And, of course, you have Eric Holder out there threatening against the schools that discipline more black students than he thinks they should, adds kind of official support to this hostile learning environment you write in your article.
Well, that's absolutely right. In many black schools, there's a really hostile environment. For example, in Philadelphia, a couple of years ago, the school budget was under stress, and so there was a newspaper article in the Philadelphia Inquirer saying that the school district had to lay off 92 school policemen throughout the district. And you have to ask the question. Nobody asked the question, well, why are school policemen in school in the first place?
Yeah. Exactly.
And I was pointing out in the column I wrote about it that when I was in school during the 40s and the early 50s, the only time you saw a policeman in school was during an assembly where you had to listen to some boring lecture by a policeman about safety.
So when we come back, I want to ask you a question, and you set it up perfectly. When you were in school, you were a black student at one time, and now you're a renowned professor. You're known throughout the country for your articles and your books. What happened? You didn't have affirmative action, I don't think. Dr. Walter Williams with us here on the Gary Sutton Show. We'll be right back on News Radio 910 WSBA. We're talking with Dr. Walter E. Williams this morning, who is professor of economics at George Mason University, columnist, author, sitting host for Rush Limbaugh every now and then, and here on a regular basis with us, and we're so pleased to have him again this morning. Dr. Williams, at one point in time, I know one of the things you say when you come on the Rush show every now and then, or used to say, was black by popular demand. But the idea was you were a black student at one time, I would think in Philadelphia, and you were a black student in college. Now you are a person of great note around the country. I'm sure there were problems like any student has, but how did you find the will to go through all those?
Well, it wasn't any problem. I frequently tell people, I'm 78 years old, and I frequently tell people, and it might not be nice for me to say it this way, but I am very glad that I got all of my education before it became fashionable for white people to like black people. And Now, what I mean by that is that when a teacher, and virtually all my teachers were white, when I got a C, it was an honest-to-God C that I earned.
Right.
And when I got an A, it was honest-to-God A. The teachers at that time, they didn't feel sorry for me, and they didn't give a damn about my self-esteem. And then also something else that people don't know is that back when I was going to school, there was corporal punishment in school. I mean, I remember holding my hands out so the teacher could whack me with the ruler on the hands. And if that happened in school, you darn sure didn't go home and tell your parents about it, because you get whacked again. And one time, we used to have to write essays, 3 or 4 page essays, when I was in junior high school, and on 2 occasions, my essay was returned to me, torn up into 4 pieces. And with a little note on top of it, at least you could spell correctly, rewrite it. And that only has to happen once or twice. Now, a teacher doing the same thing today, she might get fired.
Right.
Or he would be viewed as being insensitive. Might have to go for sensitivity training.
He might get a note from Eric Holder. Who knows?
That is absolutely right. And so I think that we've bought it, and a lot of this emerged with Dr. Spock. Dr. Spock, my mother used to say during 50s that she's not paying any attention to Dr. Spock, because he'd say things, oh, well, you should not whip your kids, or you should not do this, you should not do that. And all those tried and true methods down through the ages were cast aside, and we see the results today. In Philadelphia, for example, I think in 2012, there were close to 500 assaults on teachers. Now, where the teachers needed some kind of medical treatment, and that doesn't include all the threats on teachers. Now, when I was going to school in the 30s, in the 1940s and 50s, a person would not have dreamed of even cursing to a teacher, which is relatively routine today, much less hitting a teacher. And matter of fact, in most of our country today, we don't find these kind of problems. We don't find all these massive assaults on teachers like we do in our cities and other inner city areas, predominantly poor Black and Mexican and other minority children.
And yet, when Dr. Soul writes, Benjamin Carson's another great example, who comes out and talks about, let's go out and really achieve. We're still left with the problem of, A, we got a group of people who still want to criticize you about talking about reality, and B, we're still left with the problem that there are too many people in this country who are Black kids, for example, scoring 100 points less on tests, it's a problem. We need to somehow make it better. Is there a way out there that you can see that is realistic, that we can get these kids back up to snuff where they belong, like all other people here in the United States that are out there getting education? Well,
there are ways. That is, what one has to do is introduce some competition into our education system, and that is Black kids that are going to either private schools or the cities with vouchers or cities that have charter schools. They are doing much better than their peers in public schools. American people have been sold on the idea that we need to put more money into it. That is just plain nonsense. That is, Washington, D.C. spends $29,000 per kid.
Wow.
And I'm sure that the people in the education department in Washington, D.C., they're hoping that Mississippi does not secede from the Union. Because if Mississippi secedes from the Union, they will be at the very last in terms of academic achievement, and at the very bottom in terms of academic achievement. But we're buying all these nostrums that don't work. I mean, and we're just what we're doing. We're replacing what worked with what sounds good.
Well, and we're afraid to be, it seems to me, truthful and authentic about the real problems facing us today. Instead, we go with these quick fixes that are generally political in nature, that are used to kind of plug the holes in the dike. But eventually, there's so many holes that the dike breaks away and the dam explodes. So
right, and as I said, I had the advantage of growing up at a time when teachers were honest and they didn't give a damn about self-esteem. I remember my mother wanted me to go to Central High School, which is the most prestigious high school in the city of Philadelphia. I was at a slum school, and the teacher said to her, "Well, sending your son to Central High School would be like putting a rabbit in a horse's race."
Wow.
He said that you want more than your son wants, and until he can get this foolishness out of him, he's not going to go very far. And so the point was, if I had gone to Central, I might not have graduated from high school. I went to Benjamin Franklin, which was the lowest school in the city at the time, and I did graduate. But if I'd gone to Central, I would not have. And people had the incentive to be honest at the time, an honest assessment of people.
Well, we want to make sure that we try to make it as even at the start as we can for people, yet we know that we all start at different places. We know we're all going to suffer different rocks laid in the road in front of us along the way, and that our results are never guaranteed at the end. We have the pursuit of happiness, but not the guarantee of happiness, right?
That's right. And one of the best things that you can teach young people is, as my stepfather used to try to always teach me, he says, look, if you're going to be successful in anything, you have to come early and stay late.
And we'll end on that note today. Dr. Williams, always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Great article. Bye. Take care. Dr. Walter E. Williams with us here on the Gary Sutton Show. When we come back, we're going to stop by with a lady who is doing some great work out there, and she's working for prisoners here from the United States, around the world right now. Her name is Bridget Johnson, career journalist whose news articles and opinion columns have run in dozens of news outlets across the globe, and she'll join us here on the Gary Sutton Show to talk about a prisoner in Iran and what we're doing about it. Here on News Radio 910 WSBA, it's 31 minutes past the hour.